welcome to the podcast slash live stream segment called Talk Story to Me, where we interview various authors to talk about their books, writing process, publication journey, and whatever you guys want to know. So as a reminder, chat is free to ask questions live as we are discussing. Just make sure to keep it respectful and nothing too personal. All right, let me see if our author is on. Wait. Oh God. Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, how have you been?
Good. How about you?
Good. Oh, thank you so much for making time to hang out with us and chat with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so everyone, welcome our guest author for the night, Shana Silver. Would you like to give a kind of introduction for yourself, Shana?
Yeah, sure. I am a YA author, and I've had two YA books published. The first was Mind Games, which came out in 2019 from Macmillan, and it's about a girl whose memories are being deleted, and she has to figure out why. And then The Con Code, which came out in 2020, and it's sort of like a YA Ocean's 11, a bit of a heist. This is my
Ooh.
novel.
Oh, I love how all of your books just have like the coolest concepts. Like, just hearing them makes me go like, oh, what a great idea. Why hasn't anyone thought of that before? Like, it just sounds so cool.
Aw, thank you. I got to those ideas by rejecting a lot of other ideas.
Oh, so it goes. Was Mind Game, you mentioned rejecting a lot of ideas. Was Mind Games like the first book you completed, or had you written other projects before that?
Oh no, definitely not the first book I completed. I actually have a a different book that was published under a different name first, another YA book.
Mm.
That one was called Alice in Wonderland High by Rachel Shane, and that was also not the first book completed. Been writing since I was in high school, so I've got a lot of books on my hard drive that will never see the light of day, but that's okay. You have to write a lot of wrong ones to finally get the right one.
It's true. It's true. I feel like that's a common thing I hear with like many authors. Like their first book published was never like the first book they wrote. Like very rarely is that the case.
Yeah.
So I think it's just some books are just for practice, and that's okay.
Yes, I wrote my first one at 17 and it didn't have any plot or like character names. It was a lot of existentialism because I was reading uh, The Stranger by Camus in school. So that one should not be published. So it's fine.
I I feel that. Like I think back to the things that I wrote in high school, and I'm like glad that I wrote them because it taught me a lot more about writing, but some things are not meant to see the light of day.
Exactly. Yeah, I tried to read it back like 10 years later. I'm like, nope, not gonna happen.
Oh. So then what kind of made Mind Games stand out to you for like one of the first ones that you published? Like what made this book feel different than the books that you had written before that made you like confident that like this was one that was going to be published?
I think it was the concept. I knew I had hit on a really good concept and I was able to distill it, into a very short log line, which I wasn't really able to do with some of my previous ones, but also this was very high concept. Whereas a lot of what I had written before was a little bit more quiet, a little bit less like instantly hooky. So I knew I had a really good idea and um I had done a lot. I worked on this book for the longest amount of time as well,
Mhm.
because I wrote the first draft while I was pregnant, actually, put it aside for a few years, came back to it, revised it, and I think I just put so much into it that I kind of knew it was the one. I had also gotten a really good response rate whenever I like queried it or anything like that. So like I knew I had something good on my hands.
Oh, that's always a good sign when you're querying it and people are excited. So
Yeah.
as a reminder for our viewers, querying is the process for when you as an author are seeking representation from agents who will then represent you and your book to sell to publishers. So it is very hard to get like good response rates from agents. So if agents are responding well to your query, it's usually a good sign that they think it's something that will sell.
Yeah, and I ended up with multiple agent offers,
Ooh.
which I knew was a good sign.
Yeah, it is generally hard to get even agent offer. I can speak. So to get multiple is very impressive. So
Yes.
you mentioned that like you really thought that the concept was a winner. What was it that like kind of made you keep coming back to this story in particular? Was it the concept, the characters, the world? Like what was it that really made you kind of keep wanting to work on this one?
So it was probably the characters. I actually should probably mention that at, in the very early stages of the book, it actually had time travel in it. In the final version, it does not have time travel. So it iterated over the course of time, but I just kept coming back to the characters. And I just felt really connected to them. And I wanted to tell their story, even if their story morphed a little bit over the course of revisions.
That is generally what happens. Revisions can
Yeah.
change a lot, but would you like to tell us about your characters? Like, what was it that like kind of drew you to these characters in particular?
Oh man. Okay. Yes. So the main
Sorry, starting with the hard questions.
um the main character, her name is Arden, and I just really liked writing her because she is sort of a science genius. She goes to a school where all of the students at the school are working on like cutting edge technology and inventions. And so I really liked having a female STEM character, but I also wanted her to be like feminine and girly. So like even though she's inventing really cool technology, she's wearing her shoes that she loves with the heels and things like that. So I just had so much fun writing her. And then the boy she meets, his name is Sebastian, and he actually has no memories at all. They've all been deleted. So I just had a lot of fun writing a character who was basically figuring out who he was from the start because he didn't remember. And that was really fun.
And what a fun dynamic. Also, I just love the idea of like someone who like a woman who's smart but also like she's not afraid to like be girly or feminine. I feel like so often like I don't know, like I feel like not like other girls is like so prevalent in the YA genre, so it's so refreshing to like see someone like who actually embraces like femininity and like skirts and heels and stuff like that. I love that.
Yeah, and like one of the characters in the book is a scientist, and she's inventing like I how do I describe this? Makeup that you use like using like a USB and like rather than actually putting like stuff in your face. And it was just fun to think what would, you know, teen girls want to invent.
Aw, I love that. Also, that just sounds incredibly handy. Like, why hasn't this been
Yeah.
invented yet?
I
Like,
know,
why?
right?
Oh, that sounds so fun. So, hmm. Without spoilers for anyone in chat who hasn't read, what was your favorite part of writing Mind Games? Like a specific scene or story moment? Like, what was your kind of favorite moment in the book?
Yeah. So this is a slight spoiler, but not too much because it happens throughout the book and it happens pretty early on. But she's trying to figure out where her memories have gone, and she's able to get some of them back. But when she gets them back, they actually play out in reverse. And so I wrote those scenes backward. And so it was really fun writing those scenes. There's several of them throughout the book because I had to figure out the end point and get back to the beginning of the scene rather than the other way around.
That sounds so insanely difficult. God, how do Where did you even start with that? Like, was that something you had to like really plan out in advance? Or did you kind of just like write it by the seat of your pants and then go back and revise? Or did you plan it right from the start?
Um, I tried to write it by the seat of my pants, and I very quickly realized that is not possible. So I actually did have to very meticulously plan these because I had to figure out every single, action that happens. Like this character walks forward to the dresser, and so now they had to go backward from the dresser, like that kind of thing. So I had to plot out those scenes very specifically.
Oh, that sounds so difficult to actually write, but so much fun to read. Like, what a cool experience. Oh, I can see why that drew you.
Yes. So I loved writing those scenes, but they were very difficult and even harder to revise because if you change anything in the scene, you kind of have to like rework the whole thing to still work.
I could see how that would be very difficult, as if it is not difficult enough already to be
Yes.
revising, but to have it be that minute of like details. Oh, that would be so hard. Oh, we
Yes.
we do have some questions from chat. Uh,
Yeah.
two questions. How did you come up with the concepts for inventions you think a teen girl would want to invent? Were they things you've previously thought of in life or something else entirely?
Oh, really good questions. And I wish I had a very good answer, but I just was kind of brainstorming what inventions could be. And I made a whole list of various things that didn't exist. But it's not like I was thinking about it in advance. I came up with the list for the book. Um, but that's basically how I did. I just kept brainstorming until I hit on something I liked. But good question.
Oh, yeah, because I'm trying to think if I would even know. Like, I guess
I
because
mean,
like
I did a lot of research on like futurism sites, like, what are the technologies in 10 years from now? And so I would kind of look at those for inspiration. Although I did not take like ideas directly from them. Like I
hmm,
didn't see anything about like, whiskey makeup, but um that's sort of how I came up with that.
oh, that's really cool. I'm realizing I do not have much of an inventor mindset because like I was trying to think of like what I even would have wanted to invent in high school and like drawing absolute zero blanks.
I
So,
also, when I was very young, and I'm definitely going to date myself here, but on Saturday mornings there was a show on, or like a real life show where teens would go on and would show the inventions that they had made, and they were real prototypes. And I remember like this one girl had taken like a drill and replaced the drill part with a fork, and she used it to twirl spaghetti like automatically. And so that really stuck with me, and I think that's probably where this book stemmed from initially, just watching that show as a teen, being very jealous that I wasn't on it and wanting to.
that's so cool. So there's like a lot of like invention and like science in this book. Have you, and you mentioned being jealous that you weren't on like that really cool sounding show. Have you like, I'm trying to figure out how to like phrase this. Are you like an inventor yourself? Are you very like interested in science, or was this all stuff you had to kind of research for this book?
I mean, I'm interested in that I like to read sci-fi, but I am not an inventor. I don't work in science. I work in like the tech industry, which I guess is a little bit sciency, but I'm in the project management side, which is definitely not. Um, no, I have no background. It was all research, honestly.
Ooh, wow. That sounds like a lot of work. So how much of like writing this book was like, what percentage of it would you say was time spent like on research rather than like writing the book itself?
Ooh, I mean, it's really hard to quantify because I did it over such a long period. Each round of revisions, I would realize I needed something else. So I would research that topic and put it in. But I feel like a lot of writing is actually research, and the actual act of getting words on the page is only a small part of it. It's revising, it's researching, it's planning, it's thinking. I mean, I probably spent just as much time researching as I did lying in bed thinking up the next scene, you know what I mean? So, probably a lot.
I mean, that makes sense. And it's hard to like really differentiate like the writing from the research. Uh,
Yeah.
oh, someone asked if the show was called Dr. Fad.
Ooh, it might have been. I actually don't remember the name of it. It was on Saturday mornings in like the 80s.
Oh, yeah, because I don't know what the show is. I remember I was just watched Saturday morning cartoons. I was never, I don't know, like as a kid, I was not as interested in like real life things.
Yeah, I just like this one. They were all in like a room, and I just remember the kids would stand up and show their inventions.
Oh, that sounds so
It
cool.
stuck with me all these years. So,
So, how I know you briefly mentioned that like some of the inspiration for like mind games came from watching this show, like with kids like presenting their like inventions and such. But what was kind of the starting point of the story? Like, what was your like, how did it start? Was it like the idea of the overall plot? Was it the characters? Like, what was kind of the jumping off point for you for this one?
yeah, so my initial first draft of this was called The Cloud Book because the initial seed of the idea I had was a girl uploads her memories to a cloud and then they get deleted and she has to figure out why. So I guess I started with the concept, but the characters, once you have the concept, it's not even worth writing until you've got the right characters to tell the story
Mm.
and then the right story to tell for that concept. And so once I had the idea, it was about figuring out, who is the girl? Why is she uploading her memories? And then, of course, like who's deleting them? That part's very important too in a mystery. But that's sort of how it started. The concept came first, but I immediately shifted to figuring out the characters. And then, once I knew who she was, what does she want? What's standing in her way of getting it? Obviously, she wants her memories back, but there's got to be other um, things driving her throughout the story.
That makes sense. And something I feel like we don't get to hear about as much from authors is kind of the revision process. So you kind of already mentioned like some of the changes, but like how much of the story changed from like that first initial draft to when you sold it to when it was actually published? Like I was wondering if you
I
could
mean,
kind of talk about some of the differences without spoilers.
yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest change, as I already mentioned, was that my initial draft had time travel in it, and it actually did have time travel in it when I sold it. And that was in the call with my editor. She said, "Would you be okay with removing the time travel?" And I was like, "I'll do whatever the story needs." That was the biggest change because that changed. I pretty much had to rewrite everything in Act Two and Act Three. Act One was mostly the same, but Act Two and Act Three had to change almost entirely. The other things that changed, I combined characters. So originally she had two best friends. Now she has one best friend. And that was because we just didn't need the other best friend, and she was clouding up the story for no reason, stuff like that. And um, I'm I think that the other big change was that some of like the inventions that the teens were working on shifted a little bit, but those were more minor. But the biggest changes were reducing the characters and time travel, which no longer is in the book at all in any shape or form.
Man, that must have been so hard to like completely take out such a major element. That, wow. Sorry, I was just thinking about like the complexities of how much that must have shifted, like
I
everything.
mean, it definitely required rewriting almost the entire second and third act with a new plot thread. I guess we sort of end up in the same place and have some of the same beats throughout, but it's sort of the reasons why things happened changed and on some of the scenes changed. I also gave the main character more agency um, in the draft that sold. Sometimes she had things happen that she didn't she wasn't instrumental in causing, and now she is instrumental in causing those things. But yeah, it was a big shift. The first thing I did was like figure out, okay, which scenes have the time travel in it, and then I started taking that out and then figuring out how I could piece it all back together.
Yeah, God, I'm that still just sounds so daunting. So how did you go about like the actual process? Like did you have an outline and you just like outright deleted anything that had to do with time travel and then you rewrote it, or did you kind of like try to keep as much as you could but just like refit it around there not being any time travel?
Yeah, so the my process is definitely to outline. So what I first do is I take out all like the really little easy changes and I make those first without outlining, like the stuff that's like, oh, change this sentence. I had a few of those things just so I could feel like I've accomplished something. And then it's really about going line by line in the edit letter and taking the suggestions or the advice that was being given. And um I use Scrivener, so you can have each scene as a separate almost like document. And then I went scene by scene and I would put notes in the note section in Scrivener for that scene that basically tell me what I needed to change for that scene to meet that note. And then there could be like 50 notes in the edit letter, so some scenes might have like a lot of different things that needed to change. And then as I started doing that, I started to realize which scenes I could, keep pretty much as is. Like I said, the first act remained pretty much the same. There wasn't a lot of changes that needed to be made. So it was really just acts 2 and 3. I would start to add in placeholders for where I realized new scenes would need to go and what those would be. So it's really just tackling it piece by piece. And then it comes together through that process.
As so
And then you have
many
to write it.
projects.
That's the hard part.
Oh God, it always is. The planning goes great, and then you actually get to the execution. It's like, oh God, oh no.
Yes.
So I realize I should have probably asked this earlier, and then we do have some questions from chat. But
Yeah.
why did your editor ask you to take out the time travel? Was it just to kind of streamline the plot, or like why was that taken out?
To be completely honest, the story didn't need it. By taking it out, it wasn't actually missing anything, and it helped really clarify the goals of the characters, the mystery, because before it was muddled. It was the same mystery. Why are her memories being deleted? But it got muddled with all this time travel stuff. And by taking it out, it just everything worked in a much more streamlined way, um, and was a lot easier to understand. So she was right. It didn't need it.
I I always love hearing about things like that, like the things that like we as authors like originally think are like instrumental to the story, and then a professional editor comes along and is like, actually, I know how to make this even better, and it's always just like mind blowing. Oh,
Yeah. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, yes, I don't need this. It works just the same without it.
oh, that's so cool. Okay, we do have some questions from chat. You
Sure.
mentioned going to futurism websites to do research. Were there any particular methods you went Uh, any particular methods you used while doing the research, i.e., just taking bits and pieces of different ideas you think were cool, or did you use those as jumping off points to create your own ideas?
Um, I would say both. So I would just read article after article, and um, in some cases, reading an article would give me an idea, so it was a jumping off point. And in other times, I was just looking for inspiration, so a general sense of like, okay, so this article is talking about all these cool things you can do with you know bio technology. And so I tried to think like, well, what's something that isn't in this article that could be cool? And that's how I came up with it. There were some that I had to invent in order to fit the plot. So there's that too.
I mean, that makes sense. I feel like at some point things just have to serve the story rather than what you think is cool.
Yes.
Although if both could happen, that's always the ideal.
Yes, for sure.
All right. Someone also asked, When you're rewriting a story, how do you decide what gets kept and what gets changed or even removed entirely?
I should probably know who actually said this, and I don't, but there's a piece of writing advice that I'm sure you've all heard, which is kill your darlings. So I try to be very ruthless when I'm revising, and not get precious about anything that I like. If it doesn't work, it doesn't stay. And it's really about you basically start very high level and then you go down to even just the sentence level. So I'll first
Mhm.
start by making the big plot cuts that I know need to change to meet the direction that we're going with the revision. Um, and then from there, I go scene by scene and I figure out which scenes don't need to be there. And then it's within the scene, which moments in the scene don't need to be there. Or like big picture things like characters, which characters don't need to be there. And then eventually I do a pass where I literally go line by line and I'm like, does this line add to the story or can I cut it? Or even this sentence has 16 words, let me get it down to 10 or something like that. So you just start big and work your way to small.
So whenever you're on the fence about like whether or not an element is needed in the story, how do you kind of decide like whether or not to cut it or keep it? Like if you think I can't tell if like this character should like actually be their own character or if they could be combined with another character and still have them perform the same actions. Like how do you make that decision?
Yeah. I typically find if I'm questioning something like that, there's a reason for it. And so it probably does need to go. So I tend to err on the side of deleting it. Although sometimes I don't want to, or I convince myself it's there, I'll usually mark it somewhere, either like in the Scrivener notes section or just like in a separate file that I keep. And then I'll go back and I'll reread and then make a final decision like, did that actually belong there? I would say almost 99% of the time I end up cutting it.
I mean, I feel like you said, if you're questioning it that much, there's probably a reason why. So that makes sense. So,
Yes.
moving from mind games to Concode, which
Yes.
was your second book under the name Shana Silver, what what was it? Sorry, I'm struggle to like put the thing I want to ask into words sometimes. Like, what was kind of the process moving from mind games? Because you went directly into Concodes, right? Because the publication dates were only a year apart. So, what was it like going immediately from mind games into your next book?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was that Mind Games, by the time, Mind Games had finished, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Had gone into copy edits. I had already had a draft of the Concode written. So that's partly why it was so speedy, is because it already existed. And that one needed a lot less sweeping revisions, let's say, than Mind Games did. So the editing process went significantly faster. Um, but yeah, I mean, I basically submitted it as an option book, and they bought it, and then we edited it. But again, the changes I needed for that were much more scene level changes and not major story revisions. So it was a lot easier to revise. I had more revisions to do in the first 100 pages for that one, and then the rest of the book was I had fewer revisions, I guess, which is sort of the opposite of what I had with Mind Games. Um, and it was really just rewriting the entire first act because actually it originally took place in jail. It no longer takes place in jail. It takes place in high school, just the first act, I mean. So I basically got rid of that and reset it, but it was um, a lot of the same things happened. It just was in a different setting.
Oh, okay. For our viewers, an option book is sometimes when you sell a book to a publisher in the contract, they will have a provision where you can agree or disagree, but you basically have the option to sell them the first look at your next book, and the publisher can decide whether or not they want to buy that book. But basically, it's just
Yes.
like a first look for this publisher that you sold a previous book with. Uh, sorry, I got a little jealous when you said there weren't as many revisions required. So were you writing Concode like while you mentioned it was already written? Were you writing it while you were doing Mind Games, or was it before you even sold Mind Games?
It was before I had sold Mind Games. So what actually happened with Mind Games is that I had an agent and went on submission. It did not sell, and then I put it away for 4 years. And then 4 years later, I brought it back out, and then I tried to sell it, and that time it did sell. So I had 4 years since I wrote and tried to sell Mind Games the first time, and so I wrote a bunch of other stuff, and one of it was the con code. So it was a full draft.
Oh, nice. And I feel like that's just a story that goes to show like just because a story might not sell at like a certain time doesn't mean that the story is like bad or lacking in any way, but it might just not be matching up with like the trends of the time or the market. So just
And that's exactly what it was. The market wasn't into sci-fi when I first tried to sell it, and then it was.
yeah, this is why you should always write what you want, and even if the timing is not correct at the time you feel like you are ready to publish it, the trends always come back. There will always be a time. It may not be the exact moment you hope it will be, but don't write to trends, write what you want, and the trends will come back.
Yes, agreed. And don't give up. It went on submission. It didn't sell, but I never gave up because I really believed in it. So I tried again.
Aw, I love that. I love stories like that. So what was it? What was it about Concode that kind of drew you in?
So for that one, that was sort of an interesting journey to come up with the concept. I was actually trying to come up with the concept. And so what I did was I put a bunch of stuff into a hat. And it was like stuff that I was interested in writing about. So for instance, I put Teen Tour into a hat, and and I don't mean a literal hat. I just mean like just a bunch of stuff on a spreadsheet. And then I put heist book, and I just started playing around with pulling various options from that spreadsheet together to see if I could make a concept out of it. So I pulled the teen tour and the heist, and I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of teens on a teen tour did some heists? And then I started thinking about that. I was like, okay, well, what heist would they do? And then, I sort of went from there and tried to write it that way. So that's what drew me to it.
Oh, that sounds so fun. God, heist books are already just so fun, but what, so how different was it to go from writing Mind Games characters to the Concodes characters? Because I imagine they sound like very different, like a teen inventor versus someone who's pulling off a heist. How different was it to like go from writing that one main character to the other?
Um, I actually think the two main characters have a lot of similarities in that they're both strong female characters who are very good at a certain thing. So Arden is a very good inventor, very good scientist, and Fiona is very good at basically doing forgeries and art. I did draw some inspiration from White Collar for this. So in some ways, it was similar because I wanted to write about strong people who had a very specific goal in mind. But they're different personality wise. So that was fun to play with. Like Fiona's a little bit more, you know, I guess, confident and just says what's on her mind, whereas Arden is a little bit more, you know, STEM and smart and not as confident.
Oh, I love that. Oh, we have some questions from chat. How do you
Sure.
decide how do you decide when you bring a story that you have in your drafts out and try to query it again, or leave it for the future, or just shelve it forever? Like, how do you make that choice?
Um, I think part of the reason I made the choice for Mind Games is because it had gotten such a good response all along. like a lot of the rejections that I got from publishers were like, we really like this, but the market just isn't right for it. And so I felt in my heart that there would be a time for it. And then sort of the opportunity arose a few years later to submit it somewhere else that I thought it might be a good fit for. And they did buy it. So it was a good fit. So I guess in that it was partly the responses. I knew that I had something. I just needed to wait until the time was right. Um, but there's also a gut feeling. I've I've written a bunch of books that just didn't work, and I've written full drafts of them, and I can usually tell like by the time I get to the end, I'm like, I don't think this is working, so I'll put it aside, and you know, down the road, I might come up with a way to fix it. I've done that before, where I had no idea how to fix it, and then 4 years later, suddenly it comes to me, or I just put it aside and never go back to it. So it's a mixture of opportunity and gut feeling.
Which makes sense. I feel like keeping your eye on like the market in general is always a good method of being able to kind of tell like is this a good time to bring something out that maybe I think is still worth trying to sell, but maybe the timing was bad before. So keeping an eye on what's popular, I feel like is also not like a great indicator because also sometimes the market gets oversaturated and publication takes so long that like maybe what is popular right now will be out of fashion in like a year or there will be too many books. So I feel like just kind of keeping an eye out also can often help.
Yes, for sure. That's
Uh,
that's that's a very good point. And also sometimes the decision is made for you.
mm,
If it's been on submission to every publisher that exists, you know, you're probably not going to have an opportunity with that book with those publishers. So
yeah.
there's that too.
Yeah. So a lot of it can be out of your control, but a lot of it is like timing and gut feeling and just trusting your own intuition about some of these things.
Yeah.
Uh, we have another question. When you're coming up with a concept for a book, do you always come up with a couple themes like teens plus heist or teens plus inventor plus memory loss and try to piece them together? Or do you have different methods of trying to get that initial spark?
Yeah, I have a lot of different methods. That's sort of my favorite one is to just put a bunch of things that I am interested in writing about and seeing what I could come up with. But another method that I've used is to put movies that exist or books or whatever it is, and then use like a random generator to put two titles together and then see if I could write a log line that's like if you're pitching it as like, in the vein of this and this, sort of thing. Like you could take like Star Wars meets like When Harry Met Sally or something, and then what would that look like? And then from there, you obviously put your own spin on it, and it's not the Star Wars characters or anything like that. But I've used that before. Sometimes I get inspiration from like an article I read, or a TV show I've watched, and there's something in that show that makes me think of something else that I want to write about. So it's really just keeping your eye open for inspiration. And I try to keep any ideas that I get down in a notepad so that I could always go back to them and see if anything, that I wrote down like 10 years ago now jumps out
Mm.
at me or something like that.
You mentioned before that you weren't much of an inventor, but I feel like you are just with how you come up with story ideas. That sounds so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I can pretty much create a story idea out of nowhere by just putting things together. But the real challenge is figuring out the plot. Because there's a
Mm.
lot of times I come up with a really good concept, but then I can't figure out the story behind it.
Plot is always the hardest.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on now? Is there anything you like want to tell us about or anything that's like kind of in the works or coming up or anything you'd like to share?
But yeah, I mean, I have nothing coming up or coming out, but I've actually been writing screenplays, and I've written several, and I am hopefully gonna try to do something with them. I haven't quite done that yet, but I've been enjoying the process of writing. It's very different from novel writing, but I think in a way it suits me because it forces me to get, right to what I need to show in the fastest way possible. Because in a book, you could have an entire chapter that gives information, and in a screenplay, it's a like 3 sentence dialogue scene. So it's been an interesting challenge.
That sounds so hard. What was kind of the hardest struggle shifting from novel writing to script writing?
Um, I mean, formatting was a learning curve. It's not an
Mm.
insurmountable learning curve by any means, but it's just, I'm used to just writing sentences and now I have to format it in the correct way. But really, the hardest part is distilling what you want to write in a way that it can be in a succinct scene and it's all show. In a book, you've got descriptions, you've got inner monologue that you could use to give information, and you don't have any of that in a show. So you've got to find other ways to give that information without being expositional, of course.
That sounds so hard.
Wow.
Someone
But the way
asked,
I did it was taking one of my novels that hadn't been published and adapting it. And I think that really helped me see the differences because I could see what I could keep and what I, couldn't. And there's very little of the book that actually made it into the screenplay because I had to just change so much because of
oh wow.
it's a different medium.
Yeah, that's so interesting to like hear that like almost nothing stayed the same. Like that's just mind-blowing.
Very little. Yeah.
Someone asked, have you written screenplays in the past? And if not, what made you want to try your hand at it and shift from novels?
Part of it was that I just needed a little bit of a break from the publishing industry. And I just wanted to try something different. I also work in the media industry in tech in real life. So I've always been somewhat adjacent to television and stuff like that. So I wanted to give it a shot. I've written 3 different screenplays now.
Oh wow.
So been enjoying them. It's 2 pilots and 1 feature.
So I'm not at all familiar with the process of like how you turn a script into like a TV show or anything. What kind of is the next step for that? Like once you have a script and you think it's ready, like what do you do with it?
I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to publishing because you can query agents and you can also query managers, and they're 2 different things, but they both get you to the same place, which is to pitch it in front of studios. There's also other ways. There's websites out there, sort of. I'm sure you may or may not have heard of the Blacklist, but you can put your stuff on the Blacklist for a fee, of course, and studios will read it, producers will read it, agents will read it, and so you can get some action that way. um, Otherwise it's really the same way as novels. You just have to send out queries and pitch it.
God, so you can't even cut out the worst part of the publishing process.
Yeah, yeah. But the fact that there's managers and agents, though, I feel like opens a little bit more doors than in publishing where there's only agents.
What's kind of the difference between managers and agents?
I think the best way I would describe it is a manager is like an agent who edits. So they help guide you, they give you notes, whereas an agent is like a salesperson.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So it sounds like it'd be very good to have a manager.
Yes, yes. That's typically what people go for first is a manager. And then either the manager will connect them with an agent or they'll then do that as the next step. You can also bypass both of those and find a producer who's willing to take it on and shop it. So that's another option
Hmm.
as well. Slightly harder though.
It sounds like it. Because I guess the equivalent of that in the publishing world would be going straight to an editor.
Well, the producer may be an independent producer and then they would have to sell it to a studio. So you basically have 3 ways you could sell it.
This is, it's weird because like I feel like this is very adjacent to publishing, and yet I know absolutely nothing about how it works.
Yeah, it, It's definitely a learning curve, which is partly why I haven't started this part of the process yet, because I've been enjoying the creative part and just honing the craft and making sure that what I've written is actually good. Um, and then I'll dip my toe into trying to sell something. The good thing about screenplays, though, is that there's minimums for payment, and they're
Ooh.
pretty high, and that is not the case in publishing.
Yeah, I feel like from everything I hear, like outside of the industry, it does seem like the screenwriting and producing industry has their shit together like way more than publishing does, which is
Yeah,
really nice.
yeah, yeah.
No.
Because if you can sell it to a place that works with the WGA, like the minimum for a first draft is something like $80,000, which is
Holy
very nice.
crap. Uh as
Yes.
as a reference, when I sold my first book, it was for $10,000. So to
Thank
com to compare, it is 8 times more.
Yes. And that's just for the first draft. You can get more for if you do the revision, but they don't always contract you for that.
Oh man. Oh, well, God, that's so interesting to hear about. And like what a cool like medium to go into. I'm so glad you've been enjoying just like the writing and the creative process of it. 'Cause I know how easy it is to kind of get burned out, especially with the publishing industry kind of in the state that it currently is. Like I know personally and with a lot of writers, like a lot of people just feel really burnt out. So I'm so glad you found a way to like still keep writing and keep that love of writing.
Yeah, and that's pretty much exactly why I switched. I needed a break. I did reach some burnout. I found that I the novels that I was writing, I just kept writing myself into corners, or
Mhm.
I would finish it and I knew it wasn't right, and so I just felt like I needed a creative um renaissance, I guess. I just needed a way to boost my creativity.
Yeah, I'm glad you took the time and experimented with other mediums and just wrote for you. I'm so glad.
Yeah,
Oh.
me too. This has been fun.
Well, good. And that's the most important part.
Yes.
Oh, have another question from Chad. With all of
Sure.
this talk about the difficulties in the writing industry, what keeps you excited to write or want to keep going as opposed to laying down your pen for good?
I use writing as a de-stressor. You know, I've got a very demanding day job, let's say, and so I'm stressed at the end of the day, and so I just need a way to get that out of my body, I guess. And one of the ways I do that is by creative writing, because I can just escape from everyday life and live vicariously through the characters that I'm writing about. And I just find it a really cathartic activity. Although I should probably exercise more as well.
I feel like I'm on the opposite. Writing has become more of a stressful thing for me because of like everything happening in the writing industry. But I have been running a lot more recently.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it was stressful for me, and that's why I had to stop the
Mm.
novels for a bit, because the pressure to try to sell was getting to me. So I wanted to do something where I didn't have that pressure. Um, but I would like to sell something if I could. So
I know what you mean. But
yes.
I'm so glad you're still enjoying writing and you found a way to keep writing that doesn't have as much like outside pressure on you.
Yes, for sure.
All right. Do we have any final questions from chat before we wrap up? Oh, do you hope to be able to get back into the novel writing industry, or do you think you'll stay with screenplays for the foreseeable future?
I think I'll definitely go back to the novel writing industry at some point. I'm not entirely sure I'll go back to YA. A lot of what I'm writing in the screenplays are adult characters. I've been enjoying that. You know, I'm older too, so it just feels like the right move. So I might go back to novels, but I'd probably try my hand in an adult novel, like a rom-com or something like that.
Oh, that makes sense. As you're growing as a person, like the things you want to write about also change and develop with you. So that makes sense. Uh, also, as a completely off the topic question, if you could rewrite any classic novel, which one would it be and what changes would you want to make?
So I did rewrite a classic novel, actually. I rewrote Alice in Wonderland and I set it in high school, and it was a very true to the original novel retelling, in that it goes pretty much scene by for scene. Of course, there's some extra scenes in there, but I hit all the major scenes and I sort of reset them as they would be in high school. So like the Queen of Hearts was the queen bee of the school, and like the Mad Hatter was, the hot boy that she is interested in, and the caterpillar character smokes a lot of weed, like that kind of stuff. Um so I did retell that one. That's one of my all-time favorite novels. I love it so much, and it just felt like a really like perfect novel to set as though it was high school and all the trials and tribulations you go through in high school.
That sounds like such a fun twist and change of setting, because wow, did high schools often feel like it was freaking Wonderland and everything was upside down.
Yes. And I've always actually wanted, and I've never written this, so feel free to, I guess, steal this idea. But I've always wanted to write Julius Caesar reset in a student council environment.
Ooh, that'd be cool. I'm not a stealer of ideas, but that sounds very cool. I hope you eventually someday return to the urge to write that.
Yes, maybe one day, maybe.
Oh, someone said no questions, but many thank yous.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. All right, I think that's it for our questions. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time and giving us insight into your process and the publication journey and everything that you've been working on.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And if you ever do come out with anything, let us know, and I will be
Yeah, for sure.
happy to talk about it.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Take care and have a good rest of your night.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, and that concludes another episode of Talk Story to Me with our guest author, Shana Silver. Thank you guys all so much for joining and for the excellent questions. Oh my God, that was so fun. But yeah, please check out Mind Games, the con game, and keep an eye out for any potential screenplays. Oh, that's so cool. What a cool shift. All right, everyone. See you next time.